All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Carnism Debunked podcast. Joining me today are two very familiar faces in the London activism scene. We've got Sardar Berzo, who's a seasoned outreacher who I think is always offering valuable and unique perspectives into effective advocacy, and Connor Anderson, who helps organise, is it Romford Earthlings Experience, Connor?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and was recently also an organiser with AV. So firstly, welcome to the show, Sardar.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, especially alongside such well-renowned activists such as yourselves.
No worries, and welcome to the show. And welcome to the show, Connor.
Yeah, thank you for having me on as well. It's great to speak to you guys again, and yeah, great to be on the show.
Likewise.
So now I just wanted to start the episode with what I think is a very important discussion to get the ball rolling on what are known as single issue campaigns. So for anyone listening who is not aware, a single issue campaign within the context of animal rights is a campaign that focuses to end one very specific area of animal exploitation rather than concentrating on animal exploitation as a whole thing. So for example, anti-fur activism, anti-circus activism, anti-vivisection activism, and so on, rather than, what we would call, I guess, abolitionist campaigns, such as a general animal rights march or outreach event. Now, Connor, just starting with you, you haven't made too many YouTube videos, but one that does stick out in my mind was one you did that was titled, Why I Support Single Issue Campaigns. Now, can you summarize exactly what your argument was in that video for doing activism events that focus on a single aspect of the animal holocaust, such as, fur? Because I know for sure Sardar is going to be skeptical of this, hence why I just love the idea of getting you two together on this podcast with me. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So go ahead, Connor, summarize your argument in favor of single issue activism.
Yeah, well, I mean, that video was a very long time ago, but the main point I would have is, first of all, I just want to point out that I am an abolitionist activist. I do most of the activism I do is generic vegan outreach, so getting across an abolitionist vegan message, getting people to understand why exploiting animals is inherently wrong. I also happen to incorporate some single issue campaigns into my activism. So for example, some anti-fur activism in London, some activism against animal testing, some activism against things like greyhound racing as well. So there are a few reasons why I support this. First thing I would point out is that with a lot of these single issues, a lot of the people who will come up to us in the street are people who are already opposed to these things. So to give an example, I often co-host events in London where we'll stand outside cosmetic shops that test on animals, and we give out leaflets to people that say, like, these companies test on animals and these ones don't, so encouraging people to support or boycott certain brands. Now, a lot of people will come up to us and say, like, well done, I support you, I'm strongly opposed to animal testing, which doesn't seem to happen as much during generic vegan outreach. It does happen, but it's a lot less common for someone to come up to us and say, oh, I completely agree with, the message you're trying to get across. But what the single issue campaigns do is they give us an opportunity to actually bring veganism into the conversation. So for example, someone will come up to me at a demonstration and say, like, oh, I completely agree with you. I really love animals. That's why I don't wear fur, or that's why I don't buy from Mac, or something like that. So then I could kind of bring into the conversation, well, you say you love animals, or you say you're against the exploitation of animals. So are you vegan? And 9 times out of 10, they would say, no, I'm not. And they would say something like, I've never really thought about that before. And maybe they'll start to bring out some of the arguments we hear all the time about, whether or not they think we need to consume animal products. And then we can just take it from there, and I would treat it like a normal vegan outreach conversation. But the point is, it's a different way of getting people to come up to us and have that conversation in the first place. And I know we've all done plenty of, like, Cubes of Truth, Earthlings Experience, and they are very effective in getting people to come over and have these conversations, but they don't work with everyone. So for me, this is kind of a different approach in helping to get different people up to us who might not come up to, say, an Earthlings Experience. And it will give us the opportunity to have this conversation about veganism, which maybe a different kind of demonstration might not have done. Another thing I would say is that often when I'm going to particularly campaigns against things like greyhound racing, a lot of the people who actually take part in these events are also not vegan. So this, again, is another opportunity for me to bring veganism into the conversation. Like, I could say to someone, well, if you're actively devoting time to actually come out here and speak out against like greyhound racing, is it really that difficult for you to pick up the soy milk in the supermarket and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Now, Sardar, taking into account what he's just said, because I know you do have like a problem with single issue activism. I know from hanging around with you over the years. Do you not think it is like a good sort of gateway, as Connor says, to actually open up these conversations and connect with non-vegans and actually kind of point out their hypocrisy? Like, say you're at a fur demo or whatever.
Okay, so to respond to Connor's points, first and foremost, I feel like with single issue campaigns, anyone who does actually care about animals will know that eating meat, dairy, and eggs is actually just as unnecessary as wearing fur in this day and age as well. Because I think everyone knows nowadays in 2020, people know that you can be perfectly healthy and be vegan, as opposed to even like, let's say 5-6 years ago, where everyone used to think you needed meat, you needed dairy, you needed eggs for protein and calcium and all those other vitamins and minerals and whatnot.
But Sardar,
So
just to interrupt you, Connor's saying he does see these people at events though. Is that the case, Connor? You'll go to like an anti-fur protest, whatever, and there are actually non-vegans there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would dispute the point actually that everyone these days knows that, you know, consuming meat, dairy, and eggs is unnecessary, because it might seem that way to us. I mean, we've obviously all been vegan for a very long time. We've heard all the same arguments so many times. And I do think we kind of live in a bit of an echo chamber on our own social media accounts, where it seems like everyone kind of agrees with our stance on veganism. So I think it's easy to fall into that kind of trap where we think that, you know, the general consensus in society is that everyone knows consuming animal products is wrong. But in reality, if that was really the case, why do we even bother getting out there and doing outreach in the first place? Unfortunately, there are still a lot of people, even people who call themselves animal lovers, who have absolutely no idea that, you know, we don't need meat for protein or dairy for calcium and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of people who will devote a lot of time to going to demonstrations against, say, dog meat or something like that, who still have absolutely no idea how, you know, how unnecessary consuming animal products is. So, as I said, it may be easy for us to believe that, you know, the general consensus is that everyone knows like that animal products are unnecessary. But unfortunately, if we look beyond our own echo chambers and we look at society as a whole, you know, we're still hearing the same arguments from non-vegans we were hearing 5-10 years ago. So there is still a lot of educating to be done, and there are lots of different ways to do that. And as I said, a lot of people who call themselves animal lovers still aren't aware of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But most people kind of know a vegan at this point. Like, I think everyone, like not everyone, but most people know someone who is a vegan, or they'll know a celebrity who is a vegan, and they'll kind of like know that you don't need to eat meat, dairy, and eggs to survive and be healthy. I think the main reason people stick to their habits is just because of taste and pleasure, and probably not realizing that animals are as sentient as they think. So I think people kind of see animals as like these robots who don't really matter and don't really feel anything or aren't very self-aware. So I would say that is what the issue is with when it comes to educating people, is to make them make the connection, help them make the connection.
I was going to say, actually, Connor, have you been to, like, I don't know, the London Fashion Week anti-fur protests over the last few years?
I did go to them maybe 2-3 years ago. I haven't been to the last couple, but yeah, they are things I have taken part in the past.
What is it? Now, I've been to one of them before, but do you know what? I haven't been to one since, because I've been thinking about it as well, probably from talking to Sardar a lot. Like, why would we go there and protest fur as if that's like, you know, fur is bad, but wool is okay. But when London Fashion Week, there's all sorts of animal skins and all this kind of stuff on display. Do you think it is illogical to do that, or can you see actually any logic behind that?
To be honest, I do get your point, and you know, there is a part of me that does think, like, should we really be protesting, like, you know, fur when like this same shop sells leather and wool? And for example, there are some places that we protested against for fur for many years, and then as soon as they dropped fur, we just stopped protesting there, even though they, you know, even though like they still sell leather and they still sell wool. I guess the real difference is, I mean, whether or not you believe this is a strong point to be made or not, I think the main difference is in terms of the public perception of what these products are, because most people are kind of aware of the fur trade, maybe not in detail, but anti-fur campaigns have been going on since the 1960s, and there was a time, maybe 20 years ago, where wearing fur was socially unacceptable because everyone knew, well, a lot of people knew what was wrong with it, and even people who didn't necessarily care about animals, they didn't wear fur because they were worried about the backlash. So there is an argument to be made that people who wear fur a lot of the time are doing it in spite of the knowledge that they have, and they simply don't care. Whereas with leather, how many people are aware like of what goes on in the leather industry? I mean, I meet people today, even vegans, who believe that leather is solely a byproduct of the meat industry. Which I mean, I'm not saying that if that was the case that it would be okay. Of course, it's not. But there's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, look at wool as well. How many people out there believe that, you know, if we don't shear sheep, that, you know, their wool would just overgrow to the point where they would suffocate, or like, you know.
But is this not all the more reason to go to these events, and instead of just pandering to this public perception, essentially? And surely we should go there with signs against all forms of the animal clothing. So when when non-vegans come up to us and say, well, what's wrong with wool and stuff and blah, 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 that's more likely to open the conversation. Why not just do that instead of going there with a sign just against fur, as if fur is worse than all the others? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I guess that depends on what the actual aim of the demonstration is. Now, for a public outreach event, I would, of course, support the idea of talking just as much about leather and wool as I would about fur. But you see, sometimes we'll go to like, for example, a shop that's selling fur, and our sole purpose isn't necessarily to talk to the public, but it's to actually pressure the business to drop fur. And I think that it's a lot more realistic to expect a company to do that right now, because of the fact that so many people are aware of what's wrong with the fur trade, and of how many other companies are dropping fur. So I think we're at a critical stage, like a critical time with the fur trade, where I do believe we could see the industry continue to decline and eventually collapse within the next few years. Now, maybe within a few decades, we'll get to a point where the same can be said for leather and wool. But unfortunately, most people aren't aware of what goes on in those industries right now. So I think the first thing we should be doing at the moment, and I completely agree that we should be doing this, is talking just as much about leather and wool as we do about fur. And then once we get to a point where we can say with some degree of certainty that people wearing these products are aware of what goes on, and they just choose not to care, then we can start actually going to these places and demanding that they ban wool, that they ban leather. Because at that time, if we get to a stage where people are aware of what goes on within those industries, it would be a realistic thing to aim for. I mean, at the moment, if we were to go to a shop and say, you know, ban wool or stop selling leather, do we really think that's something that would be realistic in comparison to going somewhere and asking a place to stop selling fur? Now, don't get me wrong, I would love all that animal exploitation to disappear overnight. I mean, I'm sure that's something we'll all agree on, but unfortunately we live in a world where some forms of exploitation are just talked about more than others. So I think we need to look at it tactically and think about what can we realistically aim for abolishing now, as in within the next decade, and what do we need to still educate the public on before we're at a stage where we can start demanding that these companies ban it.
But then there are so many forms of animal injustice, and if we just target one at a time, it would actually delay us, rather than just getting straight to the core and doing just purely vegan education. And I would also argue that farm animals are actually seen as the lowest of the low, so to speak. They're not as cuddly, they're not as cute as like fur animals or animals that are tested on, for example. So I think if you can convince someone that it's morally wrong to eat... Sorry?
They are, surely. I think
No, I'm talking about public perception. I'm not saying like amongst us as
Yeah.
individuals. I mean, I love chickens more than most animals, I'd say.
But don't the public find piglets cute as fuck? I think they do. Like
But they
piglets,
don't.
lambs.
They don't see them. They just see food when they look at them. Whereas if they look at a raccoon, for example, or if they look at a ferret, they won't see just a coat, if that makes sense.
I think it's more that I don't think they necessarily see food. I don't think they have that carnivorous instinct. I think when a carnist goes past, I'm talking from my past experience as a carnist. When I used to go past the field of lambs, I didn't see food. I thought they were cute, but I didn't really make the connection that I was going to be paying for them to have their throat slit. I think that's more the thing.
I don't know. I've come across some non-vegans who've like looked at cows and been like, "Oh, that makes me hungry."
Do they actually mean that, or they
anyway?
Yeah, go on.
My point is more that if you can convince someone that eating animals is wrong, it will be really easy to convince them that wearing animals is also wrong. It will be really easy to convince them that testing on animals is also wrong. I think the eating part and like eating what comes out of animals, that is perhaps the hardest thing to give up for an individual. And if you can convince them to do that, naturally everything else will follow suit. If they do it for moral reasons. I'm not talking about plant-based health advocates and whatnot.
Well, do you know what I think is actually the hardest one is vivisection, because
I agree, actually. Yeah.
People, if people think that it's okay to stab a cow in the throat for a burger, how are they going to be convinced that it's not okay to test on a rat to cure child bone cancer or something?
Yeah, well, you could argue that there is some level of necessity from a non-vegan point of view, if you don't consider them as individuals, for sure. Yeah, I'd actually say you're right there. I'll concede that point, that vivisection is perhaps the hardest one to make people kind of see the light, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, the point still stands. If you can convince someone that eating animals and what comes out of animals is wrong because of the harm it does to them, it's quite an easy thing to do to make them not wear animals and not buy animal products like for clothing, or go to horse races and whatnot. So I think if you can convince them that, you know, animals like cows, pigs and sheep matter, it's quite easy to convince them that, you know, greyhounds matter, that horses matter, and all those other animals as well.
But are you not making a sort of single issue argument there, Sardar? Because correct me if I'm wrong, you're kind of saying, oh, if we focus on food animals, the others will. You're kind of saying we should show priority to food animals, or am I wrong? Because
the kind of status quo at the moment, most people will agree with supporting fur campaigns. Like most non-vegans will agree with supporting fur campaigns. They will agree with anti-fox hunting campaigns, but most people won't agree with you know, anti meat, dairy and eggs campaigns. That is the point I'm making.
What do you guys... Go on, Connor.
I'll just respond to something you said earlier about how, like, if we were just focusing on one thing at a time, then, you know, that would slow us down. But the thing is, I'm not suggesting we just focus on one thing at a time. It's not as if I'm solely focusing on the fur trade, and then once the fur trade is done, then I'll go to, I don't know, greyhound racing or something like that. As I said earlier, 99% of the activism I do is vegan outreach. It is the Earthlings Experience, the Cube of Truth, that kind of thing. Now, I am, and I would agree that if someone is focusing like 99% of their efforts on just one single issue, then I do understand why there will be an issue with that. But from my perspective, I think incorporating a bit of single issue campaigning into my activism, which is already, you know, primarily focusing on meat, dairy and eggs. So if I were to agree with you and say that, yeah, meat, you know, focusing on meat, dairy and eggs should kind of be the priority, because if we can get people to understand why that's wrong, then it would be easy to get someone to understand why racing animals is wrong. The thing is, I'm kind of already doing that because, you know, as I said, 99% of my activism is talking about food animals at the end of the day. But the point I'm making is that there is a place for single issues, you know, for single issue campaigns in this movement. And there was something else you said earlier, but I completely forgot.
I
It'll
was
probably
gonna-
come back. Yeah, but
Yeah.
For just picking up on that, Sardar, is there a place for single issue campaigns in the movement, or do you kind of stand by it? I know a point that you kind of made a while back, speaking to you, is I don't think you thought there was any place at all for single issue campaigns in the movement. Or
That used to be my position. I would say, however, that my position has kind of evolved over time. I would say that as long as you do single issue campaigns with a vegan message, but then they wouldn't be single issue campaigns in the first place, right?
You could incorporate, though. I guess as Connor said, you could do an anti-circus protest or whatever it is, and you could try and incorporate a vegan message in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is and going back to what I was saying earlier, that's why single issue campaigns do give you the opportunity to bring veganism into the conversation, because as I said, there are people who are already against like animal testing or something who will come up to us to, you know, either to take some information or to say like, well done, I support what you're doing, and then bring veganism into that conversation.
But is it sorry, after you. Sorry,
Often I will come away from like an animal testing demonstration and I'll have had just as many like productive conversations about veganism as I will when I've come away from like an Earthlings experience where that's actually the purpose.
Sure. And I salute you for that. Absolutely. Like that is what everyone should be doing. And in fact, I would say that is a net positive. It's better to go to these events and talk about, veganism as well as whatever issue it is. But I would say if you're only going to these events and only exclusively talking about that particular issue, like if you, for example, attend a anti-Yulin dog meat festival, like March, for example, and you only spoke about the dogs, you didn't speak about how this is basically happening to animals just of a different species as well, then I would say that is counterproductive, because you are kind of reinforcing people's own speciesism. You're kind of making them feel good about the fact that they don't eat dogs, unlike, you know, like them thinking like, oh, only the like it's usually attached to like some form of racism, isn't it? They'll always be like, oh, the bloody Chinese. Have you ever looked at like a Facebook post of a Yulin dog meat like festival video or something where like they showcase it, and you just look at the comments and there's so much racism and just people bashing, you know, Chinese people, and, you know, having a bacon, you know, hamburger in their hand at the same time. So
but
it's just like,
I guess if we're brave enough, that's an opportunity to have a conversation about it as well. I mean, I know some of the comments you do see on some of these posts are some of the like lowest of the low, but again, it is
people
like,
from Romford.
Honestly, I knew we'd get to the Romford bashing eventually, but but also I'll point out that from what I've seen, pretty much all vegans who go to single issue events do go there to talk about veganism. It's very rare that I'll hear a conversation like, say, like if someone I know who I know is an ethical vegan, if they're at a single issue campaign, it's very rare where I'll hear them just talking about fur, for example. I mean, sometimes it's good to kind of, for it to be kind of the first thing you talk about, because at the end of the day,
you need an opener, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a good way to kind of get them into a corner without trying to make it sound too aggressive.
Sure.
Like you want to get them to say something like, oh yeah, I really love animals. I'm against the like abuse or exploitation of animals.
Yeah.
Once they say that, then you can kind of back them into a corner and say, well, so you love animals. Sneaky. What did you have for breakfast this morning? You know?
Yeah.
You, Connor. That's
But this is the thing. It works, and that's why we do it.
It's good. Yeah. But
if that is actually, sorry, can I just say something to like respond? If that is actually what is happening at single issue ad campaigns, and you are actually just using it as kind of like an opener to kind of talk about veganism straight after, then I'm all for that. I'm not so, you know, vehemently opposed to single issue campaigns like Francione is, where he would be like, it's always counterproductive.
Then he's against any form of activism, isn't he?
Anyone and everything.
But there's something I know I mentioned this before in that video I posted a couple of years ago. Even Gary Francione, who says he's so against single issue campaigns, I mean, I'm not sure if he's still doing this, but at the time when I made that video, pretty much every day he was posting about dogs like who needs
Oh,
dogs in shelters who need a home, and I'm like, hang on a minute,
yeah,
is that not a single issue campaign? Like,
yeah.
so, and to
He's
be
a
honest,
hypocrite.
I mean, to be honest, I don't know
Yeah.
too much about like the work he did in the beginning. I know he is supposed to be quite a respected name within the movement, but honestly, you go on his page, and I just think, what are you trying to achieve? Who are you making
Yeah.
vegan by just
I think
making posts slagging off like AV or Savory
Yeah,
all the time?
I think he might not be the most likable of people in the world, but he is quite sharp and he is quite accurate, and I do think his perspective is important and it should be considered as like a contrary to the status quo of
I mean,
what
it's
the
certainly not
animal
something
rights
to be
movement
rejected.
is.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's certainly not something to completely reject. But honestly, I mean, I to be honest, I did give him a lot of time in the beginning. I
Sure.
used to watch a lot of his videos, like where he used to
Yeah.
like just sit down in his library or whatever, and
Yeah.
and talk about these about these single issue campaigns. So I always kind of was aware of his perspective on it, and I obviously respect his right to have that opinion. But ultimately, I just think a lot of the things he says is full of contradictions. What he says contradicts his own behavior.
I would say just because someone's a hypocrite, though, doesn't mean that their argument holds no weight. So even if he is a hypocrite, like you're saying he is, then that doesn't mean that what he has to say about single issue campaigns is completely wrong.
Yeah, of course. So, it doesn't necessarily ruin that, but you can see why it undermines the credibility of what he might be saying in the eyes of some people.
Yeah.
And it gives us something to say back at him when he starts criticizing what we do,
100%.
Also, sorry, so one more thing to kind of wrap up the whole single issue stuff as well, from my perspective. Is it blatant to onlookers and people that pass by that you are there to talk about a vegan message, or do they have to first speak to you before they can actually hear that you're talking about veganism?
I mean, it really depends on the event. I mean, for ones that I personally either run or co-run, the point is that we don't want people to know until we have this conversation, because that's how we kind of back them into a corner, So sometimes
I love how unashamedly
you
you say this, Connor.
Well, I mean, it works. That's the thing. Sometimes you'll go to like a dog meat protest or something, and you'll see banners that say things like "against all slaughter." So I guess in those instances, it is apparent that it's not just about this one thing. But for me, I think it is productive for them to not necessarily realize that's where the conversation's going until they're already there, and then they can't get out of it.
But would you have but what about the people who do pass by who don't have a conversation with you? Because that is going to be the majority of people that do see your event, right? Surely it's important that they understand that there is actually no difference between, dog meat and what happens to pigs or cows and chickens, like in gas chambers and whatnot. There's just as much suffering in the meat, dairy and egg industries as there is in the Yulin dog meat industry. So surely it's important for those onlookers to realize that, rather than just walk past your demo and just be like, yep, I totally agree with them. And then they can feel morally superior about the fact that they don't eat dogs whilst they're eating some other poor animal.
Yeah, I mean, that is a fair point, and it is about striking a balance. I mean, to be honest, if someone looks hard enough, they'll see all the vegan T-shirts and that kind of thing anyway. So they'll always kind of be aware that that's what we're doing. But also we need to think about, like, going back to what I was saying about if we're actually targeting a company for, like, selling fur, for example. I mean, I'm not going to stand outside Max Mara and hold a sign saying McDonald's are no worse than you guys. Like, that's... So it is about striking a balance, and to be honest, I guess we could say that if someone walks past an Earthlings Experience and they see footage of some from a slaughterhouse, they might think we're just there to talk about the methods of slaughter rather than giving a clear vegan message. So whether we're at a single issue campaign or if we are at a vegan outreach event, it is going to be difficult for someone to get the impression of why we're there unless they do stop and talk to us.
Or unless you're holding an explicitly vegan sign, like, I don't know, total animal liberation, go vegan now, all animal use is unnecessary, or something like that.
Yeah, but good luck trying to do that at a Cube. You probably get a direct message from the founders. But
well, they are quite.
But yeah, I'll get the point you're making. But
what you mentioned there a moment ago, actually, I wanted to pick up on that. The whole McDonald's thing. Do vegans unfairly single out? I say unfairly. Of course, it's fair that McDonald's is criticised, but do they inconsistently single out McDonald's? Because
Yes.
when you go
Have
on
you
these
ever been
marches,
to an animal rights march?
yeah, and then they're standing outside Lush like cheering, going, "Woo!" Lush still use fucking lanolin and honey.
Honey, yeah.
Have you ever seen in an animal rights march, they'll literally just go up to the window at McDonald's when we pass by and they'll just like stick up their middle fingers and like do the whole wanker sign and everything.
The police are like already have like a cordon around it, like before you even get there.
I mean, are we that predictable? They know where we're gonna go.
100%.
We are like, yeah.
And this is the thing. Not only. And this is the thing. Not only are we giving that impression, but people kind of know that's what a lot
hypocritical.
Of vegans think. Because the fact that they felt the need to get a bunch of police officers outside McDonald's, but not Costa, says that you know they think that this is the impression we have. They think that we think McDonald's is so much worse than Costa or Starbucks or whatever. And I guess
that makes us look irrational.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and Costa are probably rubbing their hands together, thinking, "Ha ha ha!" They don't even like pick up on the fact that we're raping cows every day.
Yeah.
But then, did you see the whole news article that was going around when the Extinction Rebellion demos were happening, and there was like 2 of the protesters were actually in McDonald's, and people were just like rinsing them for being in there. But it's like, what difference is there between the protesters going into McDonald's and any other place? Like animal exploitation is happening everywhere, right? Going back to the whole single issue thing. Going back to the whole single issue thing, I had a really good point to make, but it's just slipped my mind now.
I've got a point I wanted to bring to you. Actually,
go on.
Imagine you're in Spain, and there's. In fact, no. Imagine you're not in Spain. Imagine you hear that there's a. Yeah, it's a bit colder. Imagine that there's a bullfight going on in Spain, and you're in the UK, whatever, and there's a huge bullfighting event, and Spanish anti-bullfighting activists who are probably 90% non-vegan, maybe even 95% non-vegan, are rallying to shut this thing down, and they're going to do a big blockade of like the bullfighting stuff. Do you support that?
So I would say that is probably it's definitely a good thing if bullfighting is shut down. I'm not questioning that for 1 second. But what I'm saying vegans activists should do is go to these events but promote veganism to the people who are campaigning against it. Because non-vegans will still do single issue campaigns, right? They'll still go to these anti-bullfighting events. They'll still go to anti greyhound racing events and anti-vivisection, anti-fur events. So it is like Connor says, it's a really good opportunity to go there and educate those fellow activists who are not vegan yet, and kind of make them help them make the connection as well. But I think there's enough non-vegans doing single issue campaigns. Why don't the vegans do like vegan campaigns? if we're the only ones who are going to educate people about veganism, no one else is going to do it. Non-vegans are not going to do it, right? We have to be the ones to take up the mantle and do that. And I'm not saying for 1 second that Connor isn't doing that. Like, Connor, you are probably the most dedicated activist I know. You are absolutely fantastic with everything that you do.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I'll stop the brown nosing now.
No, carry on. Feel free.
But I'm not questioning your intentions. I know they're good, and I know you're so passionate about this. You really want this to. You really want all exploitation to end. I'm just saying that as vegans, it's our responsibility to educate people about veganism. That should be our sole focus. Leave the other stuff to the non-vegans, because if we get people to go vegan, that's all animal exploitation ended, essentially.
I just wanted to go
dispute. I'll kind of dispute one of the last point. I mean, I'm not saying that obviously if someone is legitimately vegan, then yes, they do. They do clearly leave out all forms of animal exploitation. But you'd be surprised. Well, actually, you probably wouldn't be surprised at the number of people who call themselves vegan, but they still use products that are tested on animals.
But are they vegan for moral reasons, though?
Well, they think they are. This is the thing. They might not actively be choosing to, to buy a product that was tested on animals, but the fact is they don't necessarily know that this is the case. And I think this goes back to my point earlier about how single issue campaigns can help to educate vegans or people who in their own minds are vegans, to educate them further about things that they might not know that much about. I mean, when I went vegan, I had no idea what was wrong with greyhound racing. I mean, I was aware it involves using an animal, so you know, it is morally wrong, but I wasn't aware of the fact, like, you know, like how many dogs actually die on greyhound tracks. I wasn't aware of how many of them get shipped off to China and used for dog meat. And knowing these things, it goes back to what I was saying about earlier. You can't have too much knowledge. So knowing about these things, you know, there's nothing bad that can really come out of it. So, especially if there are, as I said, there are people who think that they are vegan, but in reality, they're still buying products tested on animals because they're just not aware.
But would you agree, if we help make someone a vegan, if we help them make the connection, and they are vegan for moral reasons, like genuinely vegan for moral reasons, it's kind of easy to kind of make them realize that these issues are a problem as well. If that was kind of my earlier point.
Yeah, I guess if that's someone that you actually know personally, to the extent where you can actually guide them on their vegan journey. But if you're having like just a quick, relatively quick conversation with somebody at you know, for want of a better word, but
if I was just kick him off the show.
Oh god, but you know the point I'm trying to make. I guess that would apply if it was someone we personally know and we can actually continue to help them being vegan beyond that first conversation you have with them. But if it's just somebody you speak to at a cube who you're probably never going to see again, you're not going to get the chance to speak about every form of animal exploitation at that cube. I mean, how many times have we talked about greyhound racing when we've been doing vegan outreach at a cube or something? I'd be willing to bet it's not that often. And this is where single issue campaigns can also be effective, because even people who in their minds ethically are vegans, there is still a lot more that they might not know about. There's still things I'm finding out about all the time, about different forms of exploitation that are going on around the world. I only recently found out that, you know, dog fighting still happens illegally in this country. You know, I've been vegan for over 4 years, and yet I'm still finding this stuff out now. And so I think having more education out there in different forms, which can approach both non-vegans and help them get that vegan message, and can approach people who in their minds are vegans and help them actually consolidate this message and help them realize that actually then there's still more they should be doing. I think it's just it's a net positive. There's not really anything bad that can come from it.
What do you guys make of approaching fur wearers on the street?
Yes, that was the point I was going to discuss earlier. That slipped my mind, but it's now come back to me. Thank you for the prompt. So with single issue campaigns, they'll often use tactics that they wouldn't otherwise use in a normal setting. So they'll kind of have that kind of aggressive approach of shaming people. Now, I don't really know everything about how efficacy works in terms of activism and how you can make lasting change and how you can get people to make lasting changes in their life. But I think as a kind of common sense knowledge kind of thing, shaming people doesn't really work, does it?
I mean,
it can do.
Yeah, it can do. And the point I'll make is I'll go back to what I said earlier about how, because anti-fur campaigns have been going on for so many years, and pretty much everyone is aware to some extent that the fur trade is immoral, more so than they might be aware of for the leather and the wool industries. For somebody who still chooses to wear fur despite that, I feel like the only way we could get them to stop is if they actually worry that they're going to be confronted in this way. Because if I can't convince someone not to wear fur because it's immoral, I want to convince them not to wear fur because they'd be terrified about being approached again, you know?
But like, surely that person, let's say they only own a fur coat, for example, surely that person will then, by sheer knowledge of knowing they could be approached, might go and buy something that's made of wool or leather or any of the other animal products that you can wear.
Yeah, I do get the point, but as I said, with leather and wool, it's very rare that people actually buy this in full knowledge of what goes on in the leather and wool industry. So I think it has to be approached differently. Like, if somebody genuinely doesn't know something about like the products they're eating or what they're wearing, then yeah, education is the best approach. And this is why I think we need to really up our game in terms of talking about things like leather and wool at vegan outreach events, because it's just something people don't really think about. But with fur, as I said, it's very rare that somebody genuinely hasn't got a clue what's wrong with the fur trade to some extent. So
they'll kind of. Sorry.
No,
yeah,
sorry, go on.
Keep going.
So yeah, maybe the only way to get them to stop is for them to worry about facing this kind of interaction again.
Mm-hmm. But maybe if you just focused on shaming people in that sense, then surely that could result in them kind of. I don't know. I just never think that it's going to make us look good as activists. I know our intention isn't obviously to make people like us. Our only goal obviously is animal liberation, but surely it matters what people think of vegans as well. And if they just see us as these kind of aggressors, so to speak, not obviously not aggressive in the sense we're actually beating people up for wearing fur, but being aggressive in our outreach, then surely that's going to paint a negative light on us.
So do we need a bit of PR in the movement, essentially? Because I remember Gary Yourofsky, I've always stood by this. Gary Yourofsky is always going, I don't play politics with people, I don't do PR, it's all bullshit. It's not about people liking you, it's about whether people are convinced that animal murder is wrong, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But do we need a bit of...
So Gary Yourofsky, I would argue, is the most effective activist that I've ever seen. I don't think I've seen an activist more effective than him. He's actually the one that made me kind of tip me over the edge as well.
Yeah.
But that worked for Gary Yourofsky. It doesn't suit everyone.
Yeah, I agree. That's the point. I think for some people, the straight talking approach is it's the only way they know how to do it. And so you've got to play to your strengths as activists. With some people, maybe you might be good at coming across as quite a nice, approachable person. And if that plays to your strengths, then by all means do it. With other people, sometimes the aggressive approach is all you know how to do. And with some people that will work. I mean, Gary Yourofsky surely didn't. I mean, Gary Yourofsky, as we all know, he never sugarcoated anything. He just said it how it is. And we know that he was massively effective for an awful lot of people.
So Sardar, taking all that into account, what is say you're at a Cuba and Earthlings or whatever, what do you think is the best outreach style there is? I mean, ignoring all the protocols and whatever of different groups, let's say you were to set up an outreach group, Sardar, what would the outreach style be? What would you tell people?
I think it is important to listen to people, because you do get a lot of head nodders. So it's important to ask questions, and it's important to make them engaged. And obviously, you need to know that as an outreacher that there is something going on in their head. So it's important to see some level of engagement rather than just the odd head nod and whatnot. Because I used to when I first started doing outreach, I used to really skew my figures because it seemed like every conversation was going well just because people would head nod a lot. Over time, I realized actually, just because people are head nodding and agreeing with you, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have 100%. Actually made any level of connection. So I think it's the most important thing you can do as an activist is just make someone feel engaged into the conversation. Actually make sure that they are thinking. It doesn't matter what it takes to make them think, because some people require a little bit of a bit of zest in the sense of being a bit being a bit feisty as an outreacher. So it does require that you up the ante in terms of if they're making some bullshit claims like plants feel pain too. I will just straight up call them out and be like, no, they don't.
Does there need to be an element of making people feel guilty when you talk to them on outreach? Because we have all these pleasant conversations and stuff, and the head nodders, and it ends all smiling. Hey, thanks, this was a lovely conversation. Does there need to be that element of actually you do have to kind of make the person feel a little bit like they're, oh shit, mate, I'm doing something wrong every day.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for that to some degree, but I would also like be very mindful of the fact that, or even tell them at the time, be like, look, I've been in your shoes. I was a non-vegan for X amount of years as well.
Yeah.
I know exactly what it's like to see these animals as products and not actually see the murder, the Holocaust that's going on, like how these animals are actually being obliterated, how they're being sent to gas chambers, how they're having their throats slit in front of each other, just the awful atrociousness that's going on. We were all there once too, right? And I don't know about you guys. Did you guys feel guilty before you changed? I felt guilty. I think it does. Yeah, it does help to have some level of guilt, but I think it's not the outreach's duty to make them feel guilty. It should be the outreach's duty to make them kind of open their eyes and see what's going on. Whether they feel guilty or not, I don't think that's really in our control.
The problem is, surely if people just leave an outreach conversation just thinking it was a nice conversation without feeling guilty, does that not mean that the outreacher has in some way kind of trivialized what's happened, and it's just like, oh, it's just like a chat at a bar or something, and it's just like, hey, this is what's happening, and I have a lovely day kind of thing. And it's like you haven't actually been made to think about your complicity in it. And I don't know. I think there definitely can be a downside to what you're suggesting there.
I think it's important to strike a balance when it comes to these sorts of things. You can't just be a total asshole to someone. It just, like I just don't think that works. I don't think that is what we need in terms of like PR for the movement. Like going back to the whole perception of vegans kind of thing. It is important to help people get there as well. Like it depends on who you're talking to, of course. If someone is outright just being belligerent or just, completely dismissing or trivializing the lives of animals by saying, oh, well, you eat carrots.
Yeah.
Then of course, in that instance, you have to call them out for their bullshit. But
what do you guys think of using the term you instead of we at events? Because there seems to be a bit of a debate on this in the movement. There seems to be some people who advocate outreach who will say, no, we should, we murder this many animals a year, we do this. And then some people say, no, you need to say to the person you're talking to, you do this, you do that. What do you boys think of that?
I think there's a place for both, to be honest. It really depends on who you're talking to and the kind of feel you're getting from the conversation, because sometimes if I get the point, if I am getting the impression that someone's just really being, really not being receptive and they're just there to have an argument, well, a lot of the time I'd shut those conversations down early anyway. But if for some reason I decide to carry it on, like maybe if there's no one else around to talk to, then maybe a bit of shaming would work. So maybe I would say, this is happening because of you and that kind of thing. But also, I'm going back to what we were just talking about. I think there's definitely a distinction to be made between talking to people individually on the streets like we do and doing what Gary Yourofsky used to do, which was talking to a big group. Because I guess when you're not addressing one particular person, it's easier to be a bit more of an arsehole without having to worry so much about it affecting, without them thinking, oh, this is, without them feeling attacked, So I guess when you're not necessarily addressing one person, you can be a bit more, like Gary's style might be more effective, Sometimes you do have to play a bit of a PR game when you're talking to people on the streets, because I'd be interested to know, like, whether or not Gary ever took part in an event like a Cube where he actually had to talk to people individually, and how effective it actually was. I'm not saying I can hypothesize either way, but it's just interesting to know if his approach would work as effectively with a one-on-one conversation.
What do you think, George? What's your opinion on all this? Do you think it's all about making people feel accountable?
I do. I think you do have to do that. I think you do have to have a question in there, as is the current AV protocol, to end like the conversation. You have to say something like, "What what are you going to do about this?" or something like that. But I absolutely agree that it's about striking a balance. So it is about certain things. I do think building a rapport with the person can be good, but yeah, we have to have that accountability question in there anyway, because it's this whole head nodding thing. It's as you mentioned, mate. It's like when you first join an outreach group or whatever, and this is your first time ever doing outreach. You do kind of overestimate, I think, how many people you've changed, and that's just by these pleasant conversations. And I've had countless I've lost count now of how many times I've had outreach conversations, and the person's like feeling amazing, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is great, you've changed my life, let me take your number, I'll call you next week, I'll drop you an email, blah blah blah," and you just never hear from them again.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And you kind of think back and think, maybe should I have dropped a little extra something in there to actually make them feel a bit bad about what they're doing, rather than just have a nice conversation with them. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think over time you kind of maybe get better at learning the difference between a really authentic conversation and someone who's just telling you what you wanted to hear. Because when I first started going to Cubes, I was just, if someone didn't argue with me and they just listened to what I said and kind of nodded, I would I would just assume that they were taking the message on board. I remember finishing a Cube once and I had a conversion tally of 47, and like nowadays I probably nowadays I would probably tally 5 of them.
Oh, if that, mate. And this
it's actually a funny story. I remember when the organizer came round and asked me for my tally, he had this manual clicker thing, and you should have seen the look on his face when he realised he had to press it 47 times. It was actually quite hilarious.
But in hindsight,
over time you just get better at realising, like, not everyone is as authentic as they seem, and sometimes
honestly,
people will just nod just to get away.
Honestly, I would consider it a very, very good cube if I get 2 or more.
100%. Yeah. That I used to say that in briefings before a cube, just because I know that newbies proper overestimate their tallies. Back when AV had a tally, it was scrapped for good reason.
I'm actually really glad that they dropped the tally in the end.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it changes how you approach your outreach as well. Because if you feel under pressure to kind of give a good number at the end, and it doesn't matter how often the outreacher will, how often the organizer says, "Oh, there's no pressure to get a certain number," there will always be that kind of element of competitiveness there. So I think sometimes what I found anyway was I found myself actually moving the conversation in a direction where I could say that, they, like, asking them questions in a way that they would give me the answer I wanted to hear, so that I had an excuse to give this number. But like when they got rid of the tally, it felt like the kind of shackles were off a bit. And
Connor's world fell apart when they got rid of the tally.
Well, honestly, I mean, I can't say I was particularly happy about it in the beginning, but when I thought about it and when I listened to their reasoning, I realised actually they're right. And when I did outreach at a Cube for the first time after this tally thing was dropped, it felt almost like a kind of freedom to just
liberating.
do it. And I don't need to gear the conversation as like to move it in a certain way just so that I can give a number at the end, which is all kind of subjective anyway. So that is something I am actually glad that AV did. I'm glad they got rid of this tally thing, and I guess it's it's nice to be able to post a number on Facebook at the end, but at the end of the day, that's not really what it's about, is it?
Yeah, that was all bullshit, and you can't give like an objective figure like that, because the amount of different people counting, and how are they counting, what methods are they using. The only way you can be objective with it is actually get the person's contact details and then do a study of the people you've spoke to after however many years, and are they vegan, which is just obviously never going to work. It's better.
I'm certainly not giving my number out in Romford. I'm telling you that's enough.
What would you guys go on, Sardar?
All right, I was just going to say, seeing as we're on the topic of AV, can we talk about the recent issues that have arisen?
What did you want to, what questions did you
Well, first of all, I have a few questions about what happened with yourself. Could you elaborate for your listeners?
Yeah, so obviously...
Would you mind, sorry?
Yeah, that's fine. So obviously myself and another colleague, Gemma, we lost our jobs at AV. It was in the wake of this whole the post we did pointing out the utter hypocrisy of a protester at a human rights demo. It was obviously BLM holding up the severed pig's head, and yeah, basically in the wake of that, it came to Paul Nassau's attention that neither myself nor Gemma believe that any group of humans is oppressed in Western countries, and I hold that view to this day. And they said some stuff that they basically fired Gemma just for that, and then they fired me as well, saying that and some other reasons like my lack of accountability over the issue when AV was going through such a bad time over this, and I just wanted to throw my hands up in the air or some shit like that, even though in my opinion we should just be giving human supremacists, you know, the middle finger. So but now in recent light of events, I guess probably what's happened is what it might have been was they did this to kind of appease the donor or something, because I know for sure the donor had a problem with that post. And I think it might have just been a case of them saying to the donor, in order to save AV, oh, don't worry, we got rid of the racist ones or something like that. We're fine now. Oh, and we'll delete the post as well. So that could be what happened. It's kind of up, and there was no like written reason or anything given for myself or Gemma being fired. So it's kind of up in the air. It's just.
Would there be an argument, just to play devil's advocate? Obviously, you know, from previous discussions with myself that I'm on your side on this.
Yeah.
Would there be an argument perhaps that you, being, you know, the social media kind of manager, so to speak, or person who's like constructing these posts, that you kind of misrepresented the organization's beliefs and opinions by incorporating your own?
But I didn't incorporate my own. I was doing my job.
Yeah. So was there a particular post where you said that you didn't think that there was, sorry, no, you didn't say that you didn't think. You said there are people who don't think there is systemic oppression in the West, right?
So again, doing my job, because once again, it's just, it's the same as AV didn't have a position on abortion. And if someone commented saying, come on, AV, why aren't you, it's not political of you to just say that murdering kids in the womb is wrong. And then I would do my job as, you know, working for the AV and respond by saying, yes, it is taking a political stance because many people believe that are pro-choice or something. That doesn't mean the organization is pro-choice.
Yeah, so kind of your comments were in fact not for one side or another. It was a completely neutral comment to make, right? To say that there are other people who don't believe that systemic oppression in the West exists, and that is a different form of opinion. It's a different political opinion, right? Yeah. And it's perfectly reasonable for an organization such as AV to take a neutral position on something like that. Rather than say that there is definitely systemic oppression in the West. Because I think, you know, especially given what with recent events with the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd scandal kind of got everyone really charged because of how much of an injustice it was, what happened to him. So it got everyone really emotionally charged. And I don't think people were thinking rationally when it came to anything to do with that. So when you made a comment like that, I think people interpreted it wrong and thought that means that that's what AV thinks.
Well, this is
when
how
it's not.
This is how, unfortunately, emotionally driven most vegans are. It's a real shame that so many people are led more by emotions than they are by logic. It doesn't matter if, you know, you say something that, you know, oh, it's not the time to say this or blah, blah, blah. You know, you have to just speak truthfully, whatever it is. And I was just doing my job and I completely stand by that. And I did nothing wrong.
I think for me, sorry,
sorry, I was just going to ask one final thing, and then I'll let you speak. I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
Okay, awesome.
Having a
George,
drink, resting.
Would you say that the directors of AV also had that kind of neutral political opinion, that they also before the donor got involved or whatever happened. I to be honest with you, I'm not 100% clued up on it all. I don't think any of us are. There seems to be a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. Do you think that they had a neutral political stance when it came to human politics?
Yeah, neither of them really, I don't think, would have given a shit that myself or Gemma didn't believe in the existence of systemic oppression in the West. I'm kind of skeptical as to whether Paul and Assault did before this whole thing anyway. I think they did it again, driven by emotions in this heat of the moment, and maybe to appease the donor. I don't think it's anything that would have had any kind of bearing on their decisions before, if that whole global thing wasn't happening.
Yeah, Connor, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I think for me, what was most surprising about this was how easy it seems for them to make this decision. I mean, George, you've been a part of AV for, I mean, as long as I've known you,
right?
Yeah,
since he held the first UK chapter, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and that's the thing. And but no, the thing is, you weren't the first. I remember not long before you and I left, there was someone else, I can't remember who it was, but there was another member of their team who, as far as I was aware, had a fantastic relationship with Paul and Assault, who just overnight, was just told to stand down, and we were never given an explanation. There was just a post put up in the organisers group saying something like, we've asked this person to stand down from their role as, I can't even remember what their role was now, but the point is the fact that they can get rid of both you and Gemma and this other person so easily, it shows a kind of disloyalty, which made me realise that if they can do that to you guys, they can do that to anyone. And of course, what happens with the organiser that I was working with, who was also kicked out shortly after that, it's just it just made me realise that.
Yeah.
The
funniest thing is there are thousands of AV volunteers all over the world who agree with me and Gemma on this, and there'll be other staff members who do as well. But it's only that they just had to find some kind of reason to appease the donor and the baying mob as well. So it was it was damage control.
On someone, didn't they?
Yeah, it was all damage control. It's bullshit.
But to be fair, if you were in charge of an organisation and you had a donor that was contributing, let's say 90% of your donations, and they were giving such a huge lump sum, you would do what, I think you could even make an argument that the ends would justify the means in sacking people and scapegoating people, because to have those funds means that you can still help those animals. So it would make sense to fire someone, even if it's not something you agree with, which is why I think we should get money out of, there is a good argument to be had that we should get money out of animal rights, because as soon as you put money into these kinds of things, you can kind of make people do things that they don't agree with. We all do things that we don't agree with when it comes to our jobs. I'm sure there are non-vegans, there are vegans out there who work non-vegan jobs. It's just something we have to do, right? Which is why we should avoid doing any kind of job we should avoid doing any kind of volunteering where we are getting paid to do so, because then that money, that wage that we rely on, can make us compromise on things that we wouldn't otherwise compromise on.
Now, here's the thing. I do think money needs to be in the movement. In fact, I think a lot of money needs to be in the movement, because we're up against the most powerful industry in the world. But it needs to be in the hands of the right people. It can't be in the hands of people who will just cuck to anything for the money. It needs to be in the hands of people who will just stand resolute through whatever it is. Because does money change people, or do certain people conform to money? That's the question.
Yeah, but then again, we like I said, we all do things that we don't agree with for our jobs, right? That's just a fact of life. Not everyone can have a vegan job, and even if you have a vegan job, it might be an organization that doesn't completely align with yours. So, for example, I could be working for a vegetarian campaign instead of a vegan campaign. And that's not something that I would necessarily agree with.
Our career outside of animal rights is our fake self, though. That's our fake persona. Going into the interview and stuff and putting on this pretense that I would love to work for Woolworths because, I'm really enthusiastic about customer service. And you say all this bullshit that even the employer knows it's just bullshit. It's just this pretense we have. But in animal rights, it's about being real. It's about being you. And animal rights activists shouldn't be. I live by this saying: I would rather be hated for someone I am than loved for someone I'm not. And that's why I will always stand by what I say. I won't cuck for any money, for any job in animal rights, anything like that.
I commend you for being like that, but I don't think everyone has such strong principles or even such strong like resilience. That's the word I wanted to say, because it does take a lot of resilience to go against what your employer is telling you to do, because you rely on that money, you rely on that income, and especially now with coronavirus and everything, it's harder than ever to get a job.
Okay,
so go on.
Picture an animal rights movement without money. What would it look like, and how would it be effective?
You barely see it. That's what it looked like. I hate to say it. I mean, I hate the whole concept of money. But you're right.
It's the system we live in, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, as long as the big agriculture, as long as these corporations have money, we need it as well. And you're right. We do need a lot of it in the hands of the right people. It's not something I'm happy with, but it's just the game we've got to play.
Yeah, but at the same time, could someone in theory could be a mystery donor, and they could actually be like a CEO of like animal agriculture, and they could actually pull the strings to make an organization essentially sabotage itself. I'm not saying, for instance, I think this donor, by the sounds of it, has good intentions, a bit misguided, but
very
good
misguided.
A bit misguided, but good intentions regardless. But like someone in his place could be a CEO of animal agriculture and want to sabotage the vegan movement, and they can very well do so by making these directors be able to cuck to whatever demand they want to.
It would be the ultimate infiltration tactic. But if we had money, we could do the same thing, couldn't we? We could. Go on, Connor.
George, I mean, without necessarily giving away who it is, if you're even aware of this, I mean, are we sure that this donor is actually an ethical vegan? Like, do you know that at least? Because I feel like, when someone starts causing this much division over money, I kind of wonder whether they're, what their true intentions are in the first place. I mean, like I said, I don't expect you to even know who this donor is, but do you at least know that he is someone who does necessarily have the right intentions, even if, as we said, they are a bit misguided?
Yeah, I could be fairly certain they're an ethical vegan. If they weren't, it would strike me as crazy that they funded AV, Save, Joey Carbstrong, whoever else. I mean, what the fuck are they if they're not a vegan and they're pumping money into all these groups and people, right? So cause it wouldn't even make sense if they were a vegetarian and they're funding all these organizations and people who are speaking out against the dairy industry and stuff like that.
Well, literally saying fuck vegetarianism, that's what these people are saying, the people that they're funding. But I mean, yeah, I don't think this donor, for instance, it doesn't strike me as someone who could be, deliberately trying to sabotage the movement. But I think there is a case to be had that when we involve money in a movement, there can be potential for someone to sabotage us.
Yeah, but there can also be potential for someone to sabotage us without money in the movement. There can be cop infiltrators and stuff like that. I think with or without it, Big Ag are going to try. They're going to play their dirty tricks, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I would, in this capitalist, money-driven world we live in, animal rights organizations need money. And I do think it's I have no loyalties to AV anymore, but I think it's fucking crazy how people only scrutinize AV for this money stuff, but none of the other animal rights orgs. I looked up Peter's wages yesterday because people are banging on about transparency. And yesterday, I think 56% of Peter's staff earn more than 45 grand a year. Now, I've got no problem with that, but where are the intersectionals speaking out about that? Where's the cranky vegan and Elliot Gold and all these other white saviors? Why aren't they going after fucking Peter? Why is it always AV?
Yeah, that's a very fair point to be made, actually. There is an over scrutinization of AV in particular, but I think that's because they attend these demos themselves, so they feel involved and therefore feel like they should be more accountable. But at the same time, I do feel like there should be transparency, not just with AV, but with every single organization there is. But at the same time, I can see the argument that it's up to every individual whether they want to donate or not, right? No one's forcing anyone to donate. Yeah. So you could say, if you don't like something, if you don't like that there's no transparency, just don't donate. You don't have to donate. No one is forcing you to donate. And the donor has now retracted all of his funding from AV as well. So there we go.
Here's the thing. Intersectionals act like there's a fucking gun to people's head or something, and people are being forced to do stuff. Like, if someone wants to donate to something, they can. And it just makes no sense that they scrutinize just certain people and groups or whatever. And then they always say the same thing. This money could be going to sanctuaries. And yeah, it could. I'd fucking love for loads of that money to go to sanctuaries. But then those people are buying useless, trivial household tat every day, when that money could go to... You could just say to an intersectional, you bought a fucking flower pot today to put up on your windowsill. Why didn't you give that money to a sanctuary?
Yeah, and ironically, I've never heard an intersectional demand like accountability from a sanctuary in terms of where all their finances are going. I'm not saying they should.
No, there's that trust. We have that trust.
I'm not saying I'm not saying they should necessarily, but I think it's very it's a bit hypocritical for them to be calling out organisations like AV over money all the time, but yet they never make the same demands of sanctuaries. Why is it that they just assume like sanctuaries are handling money correctly and like other organisations aren't?
Though I could be mistaken, but I think there is some drama recently. It could be over like Tower Hills or something like that, where some intersectionals are doing just that. So that could, you might be wrong there, Connor. I don't know. They might be overly scrutinising certain sanctuaries or something. This is what I've heard. This is gossip.
The thing is, I kind of need to be careful what I say here because I kind of know more about that than I can say. But basically, the problem isn't with money. That's not what the saboteurs, as I refer to them, are making an issue over. It's not about money.
So this is the wrong kind of sabs. This ain't hunt sabs. This is sanctuary sabs.
Yeah. Basically, like I said, I kind of need to be careful what I say because I do know a fair bit about this because I'm quite close to a lot of the volunteers at Tower Hill who have filled me in on quite a lot. And there's some stuff I can say, some stuff I can't. But basically, they've what I can say is that a couple of former volunteers have kind of like come forward with some completely like fabricated evidence about Tower Hill mistreating animals. And I know that for a fact that this is bullshit because I've actually seen a video of what they actually claim is real versus what's actually true. So for example, they show the picture of like an old trough that's no longer in use. And they it's filthy, but it's no longer in use. And yet they're claiming that this is the one that they're actually using, and that these animals are having to eat from filthy conditions. I mean, the thing is, the person coming, there are quite a few people behind it, but this is coming from volunteers who are fully aware that this is all crap. But to be honest, I don't know what their problem is. I don't know what they're trying to achieve or why they have these issues with with Tower Hill. But with them, it's not about money necessarily, the issue that they have with them. But without saying too much, all I can say is that I'm fully behind Tower Hill on this. And I think, I can't tell people what to think. But, as far as I'm concerned, Tower Hill have done nothing wrong.
All right, guys, we will end the episode there. Thank you so much. Support Tower Hill if you're listening to this. Because it does sound, from what I've heard, that there is quite a bit of defamation going on. So I'll leave a link to help support Tower Hill through this tough time as well. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you're listening on the YouTube link, please drop your thoughts below. Drop your comments about anything we've discussed today. We'd love to know your opinions. Thanks, Connor and Sardar, for joining us. Until next time, thanks